intimate, which means there's going to be more time for everyone's voice to be heard around the Seder table. Because if it's just a handful or less of people, everyone needs to pitch in a little bit more this year. So here are some ideas to discuss. The first idea is something that's so unique and pivotal to the whole holiday of Passover. It's important to remember that Passover is not just an anniversary or commemoration of an event that occurred way long ago. It did happen 3,332 years ago, which is quite incredible, in the year 2448 of creation, and now we're in the year 5780. So we're talking about an event that happened 3,332 years ago. And you ask yourself, how did we carry this story on for so many millenniums? And the answer is in the Haggadah. The Haggadah says, B'chol dor v'dar chayav adam lerot et atzmo. A person has to see themselves as though they personally are leaving Egypt. You know, the word history is made up from his story. This is not his story or her story. It's my story. It's my personal story. I am personally going out of Egypt on the night of Passover. So when you start the Seder, you're in slavery in Egypt. When you finish at the end and you say L'shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, you're a free person. Imagine a transformation that takes place over the course of the table, Seder meal. So you are going from slavery to freedom, and you have to see yourself in slavery and see yourself going free. Now this is, you may say, a very quick redemption, but we know that we have a body and a soul. And from a soul perspective, things can happen very quickly. The whole holiday of Passover happened b'chipazon, with great swiftness, with quickness. Now, I want to share with you a beautiful thought that illustrates this idea. Usually when we do a mitzvah, we recite a blessing. Before we blow the shofar, we make a blessing on the mitzvah of blowing the shofar. Before we shake the lulav and esrog, we make a blessing. Before we put on tefillin, we make a blessing. There are very few commandments that we don't make a blessing before, and there's a technical reason. So, for example, when women light candles on Friday night, they don't make the blessing, in that instance, they make the blessing before, but they cover their eyes, so now they see the light, and they're appreciating the light after Shabbat begins. But let's say Netilat Yadayim, washing our hands. We don't make a blessing until after we washed our hands, because when our hands are still unclean, we cannot make a blessing yet because our hands are unclean. So we're forced to first do the mitzvah, which is washing the hands, and then we recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim. But in most cases, usually the blessing precedes the performance of the mitzvah. Now here's the question. If the night of Passover, there's a mitzvah of Igadat Levincha, to relate to your children the story of the Exodus from Egypt, every one of us is commanded to tell the story of the Exodus. So why don't we begin the Seder with a blessing? Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who instructed us on the mitzvah, on the commandment of reciting the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Why do we not recite a blessing before we begin performing the mitzvah? Because after all, we're performing a mitzvah, the mitzvah of reciting the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Why not make a blessing before we perform the mitzvah? However, when do we say the blessing? We actually say the blessing at the end of the reciting of the Haggadah. When we finish the Haggadah, we thank God, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Olam, who redeemed us and redeemed our ancestors from Egypt and brought us to this night to eat matzah maror. So God should bring us to other holidays. And then we make the second Bori Priya Gafen on the second cup of wine. Why don't we make a blessing thanking God and for the mitzvah of reciting the story of the Exodus from Egypt before we start the story? And the answer is that we take it literally. Before we start Avadem Hayinu, we're still enslaved in Egypt. We're not free yet, so we can't thank God for our freedom. It's only when we finish reciting the Haggadah, before we drink the second cup of wine, over the conclusion of the reciting of the Haggadah, then, and only then, can we make the blessing, because now we went free. And that's very important. Tomorrow night when we sit down at the Seder, we're not just remembering an event from 3,332 years ago. We're physically, literally seeing ourselves as though we personally are going out of Egypt. In every generation, Jews saw themselves going out of their personal slavery. Maybe this year it has more significance because we find ourselves in confinement of one sort or another. So we could relate more to the idea of confinement. But to realize that over the course of the Seder, we are going free, physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. And, the Seder is a journey from slavery to freedom, and we have to see ourselves going on this journey and setting ourselves free. And this has been a period where people have been spending more time thinking about life. And the Seder, in some ways, like a group therapy. You sit around the table and you talk about the meaning of life and the purpose of life and what real freedom is all about and what it means. And I think this year we have a new perspective and a new definition, and there'll be a lot of new ideas shared around the Seder table as a result of the last few weeks that we've been going through. Has stimulated tremendous thought and conversation amongst thinking people. We're all thinking people about what real freedom means, and maybe we had it all wrong when we thought that the way we were living was truly free, and we have a new appreciation for what freedom is all about. So remember, number one, that when you start the Seder, you're in slavery. At the time you finish, you're free. You have to gain a new sense of perspective and freedom as a result of the Seder, and that brings me to the second idea. The second idea I would like to share is that, again, very unique to this year. We all know that before we start the Seder, one of the first things we do is we say, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. And then we say the famous words, Kol dechvin yesei v'yechol, whoever is hungry, let them come and eat. We invite everyone to our Seder to come and join us. Now, why do we do that, by the way? Because part of being free is passing on, paying it forward. God freed us, we have to free others. If there's someone out there who's hungry or is lonely, who doesn't have a way to conduct the Seder, we want to liberate them, because one of the most important lessons and messages of Passover is that God liberated us, and therefore we have a duty and obligation to pay it forward and to liberate others from their oppressive state, from their confinement, from their meitzarim, boundaries, limitations, inhibitions, confinement, restraints. And therefore we invite hungry and lonely people who may not have with whom to conduct the Seder to come join us. Now I was thinking that this year it's very unusual because we can't invite anyone to our Seder. Even if we wanted to, the health officials tell us we're not allowed to invite anyone to our Seder. And indeed, Jewish law always says, health and safety is the top priority in Judaism. So we have to follow the rules. So this is the first year that we can't invite people to our Seder. We can't invite our family, we can't invite our friends, and we can't say, whoever's hungry, come and eat. So what meaning will these words have this year when we say, whoever is hungry, come and eat? And perhaps this year, more than any other year, it takes on a new, deeper significance and meaning. And this is my second thought to share with you. Kol dechvin, whoever's hungry, let them come and eat. You know who we're inviting? We're inviting ourselves to the Seder. You see, sometimes a person could be present, but they're not fully present. I'll give you an example. The last time you flew, I know people aren't flying now, but the last time you got on a plane and the pilot got on and the stewardess stood up and started to give the announcements of what to do in case of, God forbid, an emergency, and giving all the instructions. Were you paying attention? Or were you saying, I could read my magazine or look at something else, or do something else, because I've heard that announcement hundreds of times already. So I don't tune in. I'm not present. I'm listening. My ears are hearing the words, but I'm not really concentrating. So too, a Jew could sit down in the Seder and say, I've heard this story. That's why the Haggadah actually tells a story about the sages who sat up all night till the morning telling the story, because even though they've heard the story many times, as we say in the Haggadah, afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevonim, kulanu yodim et Torah. Even if we all know the Torah, we have to tell the story again and again. Why? Because you have to invite yourself to the Seder. You have to realize that I'm showing up fully with my mind, with my heart, with my soul, with all of my being. I invite myself to be attentive, to be present, to be fully present, to engage in the meaning and the spiritual messages of the Seder, to not just listen with a half of ear and say, when are we going to get to the food? But whoever is hungry not just for physical food, whoever is hungry for spiritual nourishment, as the prophet says in the times of the Messiah and the coming of Mashiach, there'll be a hunger, not a hunger for bread, not a thirst for water, but to hear the word of Hashem, And so we have to make sure that we are present and we show up and we invite ourselves to the Seder. Talking about thinking about others, I just want to share a story that I shared in one of the videos over the past few days. So I apologize if you're hearing it for the second time. But it's a story of 1945 with the Skoloni Rebbe. After the Holocaust, he managed to get some wheat and to bake some matzah. And he announced that he would be giving out one matzah for any Jew who would like one. And if you're conducting a communal Seder, he'll give you 3 matzahs, handmade matzah for your Seder. And Jews from all over came to collect, to receive the matzah. And suddenly this Rabbi Moshe Heger, the Vizhnitzer Rebbe's son, came to request matzah from the Skolini Rebbe. And the Skolini Rebbe gave him 3 because his father would be conducting a communal Seder. But then the son of the Vizhnitzer Rebbe said to the Skolini Rebbe, my father asked if he could get a second set of matzahs, 3 additional matzahs. To which the Skolini Rebbe says, I don't have enough. I'm sorry. He says, but my father really asked if you could get a second set. He said, if I give you, I won't have enough for others. I'm sorry, I can't. But he kept on pleading with him, and finally he said, okay, and he gave him 6 matzahs instead of 3. This was a few days before Passover. Just hours before the holiday began, the son of the Vizhnitzer Rebbe returned to the Skolini Rebbe, and he said to him, my father sent me to ask you if you have any matzahs left. And the Skolini Rebbe said, I'm sorry, but I actually told you I had very limited supply, and I gave away all my matzahs, and I have no matzahs left. And he said, my father asked me to ask you if you have any matzahs left for yourself. To which the Skolini Rebbe said, unfortunately, I don't. There were so many people who needed matzah that I gave away my last matzah because I said, they need the matzah just like I need the matzah. Why am I any better than them? And so I gave away my last matzahs. At which point, the son of the Vizhnitzer Rebbe took out 3 matzahs and he handed it to the Skolini Rebbe, and he said, my father asked me to give this to you and wish you a happy and a Zisum Pesach. Because my father said he knew, he anticipated, knowing you that you would give away your last matzah and leave none for yourself. And so he deliberately asked for 6 so you could put away 3 for you to give it back to you before the holidays so you could have matzah for your own Seder. That is the meaning of freedom, to be selfless and to think of others as much as you think of yourself. As I said in today's video, that on Passover and on this holiday, especially now, we'll learn to go from I to we. Not just think about ourselves like we did in the beginning about self-preservation, but think about us communally, globally. And someone sent to me, Harris Free, that illness begins with an I, but if you substitute the I of illness to W-E for we, you go from illness to wellness. And that is a great key and component in not just physical health, but spiritual and emotional health, not just to think of I, but to think of we. Story told of someone who once wrote to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose actual birthday was just 2 days ago. The 11th of Nisan would have been the Rebbe's 118th birthday. And he wrote that he's very depressed, he has many problems, and he went on with his problems. And the way the Rebbe responded to his letter was, the Rebbe circled all the I's in the letter. There were like 28 times he used the letter I, and the Rebbe sent him back his letter. The Rebbe's message was very clear, that there's too much focus on I, and that's where the unhealthiness and the anxiety and the stress and the worry and the unhappiness of life comes from, when we focus too much on ourselves rather than communally, familial, looking into helping others, like the Skoloni Rebbe who gave away his last matzah, but then like the Vizhnitzer Rebbe who took 3 in addition to give it back to him, knowing that he would give away his last matzah to make sure that the Skoloni Rebbe would have some matzahs for himself. My friends, tonight we come to the night of the year that we do the search for the chametz, bedikat chametz. We all know the custom that after we've already sold our chametz, by now everyone should have filled out their form online, if possible, to just sell your chametz for Pesach. So I could go tomorrow and sell it to a non-Jew. You do not own chametz on Pesach, as the Torah does not want us to own chametz. Tonight we search for the chametz. You can find it in your Haggadah, the bedikat chametz. We take a feather and a spoon and a candle, and we search for 10 pieces. And then whatever we find, we put in a bag. And first of all, we make a declaration tonight. Very important that everyone makes this declaration. It is the bitul chametz, the nullification of chametz, where we say that if there's any chametz in our possession that we did not find, we want to abandon it, we want to disown it, we want it to be ownerless because we don't want to violate the prohibition of owning chametz on Pesach. Tomorrow morning we burn the chametz. If you can't make a fire due to the circumstances, you could flush it down the toilet, and that's the final stage of getting rid of the chametz before Passover. And from tomorrow afternoon we stop eating chametz. We only eat kosher for Pesach products for the next 8.5 days till the end of Passover, till we buy back the chametz. So tonight we do the searching for the chametz. And again, everything in the holiday of Passover, you see it in a new perspective now. I know personally, I'm looking at this ceremony of b'dikat chametz. And every year I go around with my family. When I was a kid, I did it with my parents, with a candle and a feather, and we're looking for a crumb here and a crumb there, and underneath the couch, in between the cushions, in between the table cracks and crevices. And sometimes you may wonder, what does a little tiny bit of chametz matter to God? If there's a little crumb of chametz, when it comes to chametz, there's no measurement, meaning that even a mashu is the smallest, tiniest amount. You're not allowed to have it in your possession. So we go with the candle in every little corner. That's why we use a candle, not a torch, because we want to be able to get into the smallest grooves and crevices to find every bit of crumb of chametz. And subconsciously or consciously, you wonder and you say, does God really care if there's one tiny crumb? We have to go with a toothbrush and clean out the chairs in between the cracks. What difference does it make? I understand a bagel, a slice of pizza, something substantial, something significant, but a tiny little crumb, what difference does it make? And again, in light of what's going on with the coronavirus now, we have a new appreciation for that. We understand that something small could be something very big. Life is very funny. Sometimes at the time we do something, we think it's something monumental, it's something big. And then with the passage of time, we see it was small, insignificant, minor. But sometimes in life, we do something very small, very minor, and then we learn later that that was such an important, significant detail that led to something monumentous. That's why it says in Pirkei Avot, you should be as careful with a minor mitzvah as a major mitzvah, because you don't know really what's minor and major. Sometimes, passage of time, you realize what was minor turned out to be quite significant. Like Batya stretching out her hand to see why a baby was crying in the Nile, turned out to save Moshe, who Moshe saved the Jewish people, which led to the birth of the Jewish people till today. You never know which small deed is going to evolve into something great. And so the searching of the chametz we see now with the coronavirus, it's invisible. You can't even see it with the naked eye. It's the smallest, tiniest particle. Yet it can travel and cause untold illness and misery and pain and grief and tragedy. And it shows you how careful we have to be and how we have to search even for the minor things. Sometimes people think, oh, it's just a small thing I did. I may have done something wrong, but it was insignificant, or I said something I should not have said, but it was just a small comment. What's the big deal? And we have to realize that in life, we have to search for the chametz. Don't just look for the big things. Look for the small things. Sometimes those small things are the key to very big things. When you talk about couples sometimes who fight, most of the things they fight about are significant, little tiny things like, where did you put my keys? Why didn't you return what most of the things we're fighting about or we're quarreling about or disagreements with other people, or sometimes hatreds that evolve from small little deeds, small little acts that cause great repercussions. And therefore the chametz teaches us to search out in our lives even for the small things. And another very important lesson about b'dikat chametz, and I think this is such a powerful lesson, is that Judaism says, don't look for someone else's chametz. Look for your own chametz. You see, in life, very often we look for other people's flaws, other people's failings, other people's shortcomings. We focus more on others than ourselves. The idea of the searching for the chametz is find the chametz within ourselves. Every person has within themselves things that are chametz, signifying and metaphorically representing things that are improper, things that are unscrupulous, things that are egotistical, like chametz, there are 11, pride, haughtiness, which manifests itself in different ways. And so the message is you have to take a candle and look within yourself. Don't go looking within someone else. Look within your own being and find the chametz within yourself, because usually it's very easy to blame others. We often get angry at others and we blame others, but usually it's really about ourselves. It's not about others. If we looked inside ourselves and we cleansed ourselves, then the things that upset us wouldn't upset us. They only upset us because we still have ego within ourselves. And our ego gets insulted, our ego gets bruised and hurt, and so we get angry and we get upset and we think it's the other person, but it's really ourselves. It's that we still have chametz within ourselves. The famous midrash, one of the most beautiful midrashim, that when God made wood on the third day of creation, God made the trees complained to God and they said, God, it's not fair. You made iron and the iron's going to come and chop down the trees. How are we going to survive? And God said to the trees, if you don't provide wood for the handle of the axe, no axe can chop you down. And the metaphor is so powerful and psychological that people can't hurt you unless you empower them to hurt you. And of course, there is something called abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and I'm not discounting that or dismissing that or excusing that, God forbid. But to a certain degree, what the Midrash is saying is, sometimes the reason we get angry in life is because we have chametz within ourselves. We think it's the other person. But if you weren't egotistical, if you didn't have that, chametz always represents haughtiness, pride. Matzah represents humility. We wouldn't get so upset. So it's really the handle that we're providing for the axe. It's the chametz within ourselves. Stop looking within others. Stop pointing fingers at others. When you point a finger at others, you point 3 fingers back at yourself. Look more importantly within yourself and find the leaven, the bread, the chametz within yourself. And that will be the way you'll find freedom, true freedom, meaningful freedom. You'll free yourself from the oppression that you feel sometimes, because you seek the fault in others rather than search where you must search, which is within yourself. On the night of Passover, I want to just look at the Seder table, and we'll talk about this more this evening at greater length. But we all know what the ka'ara looks like. We have 6 items. I don't know if you can see this, but we have 6 items on the Seder plate. And then in addition to that, we have 3 ma'atzot, 3 either handmade or machine-made matzah that are on the ka'ara. So I just want to give you a little bit of a Kabbalistic thought. And that is that according to Kabbalah, this Seder plate, which comprised of the 3 matzah and the kara with the 6 items, including the plate, we have 10 items, 3 matzah, 6 items that we'll talk about in a moment on the Seder plate, plus the plate. So there's a total of 10 items, because usually the matzah goes on top of the Seder plate. And according to Kabbalah, listen to this, the 10 items represent the 10 sfirot, the 10 spheres of creation, which are really not just the building blocks of creation, but they are the 10 components of the human soul. And since on the night of Passover we have to go free, every part of our being has to go free. All 10 dimensions of the human psyche have to go free. Now, we could spend an hour just explaining this, but I'll try to do this as a brief overview, and you could research this further because it's discussed in many Kabbalistic sources. So we all know Chabad. The Chabad movement is called Chabad because it represents the 3 intellectual faculties, Chachma, Bina, and Dat. If you want to know the difference between the 3 intellectual faculties that every human being has, because we're in the divine image, so we were created by God and we have the same components of God's spiritual DNA. Chachma is that flash of light. You know, when you're pondering a problem, then you go, I got the answer. You don't even know what the answer is. You can't articulate it yet. You haven't developed it in your brain. But you feel you got this ray of light. It's like the light bulb moment. That's Chachma. It comes from a higher place into your brain. Bina is where you then extrapolate it, develop it, flesh it out in your mind to its full understanding of the idea. And then Dat is the wiring between the brain and the heart, where you now take what you understand intellectually and you have not just IQ, but EQ, you feel it emotionally. So sometimes you understand information in your brain, but it doesn't register in your heart. The combination of understanding of the mind and the heart together is called dot. So the three matzah represents many things, Kohen, Levi, Israel, many other symbolisms, but it also represents Chachma, Bina, and Dat, the three intellectual capabilities and faculties of the brain, which give birth to all the emotional components. And now we come to the symbolic meaning of the other 7 attributes of the soul. So the first one is chesed. So we all know we have a shank bone on the Seder plate, which represents the outstretched arm of God. That represents kindness, chesed. God came with abundant love and kindness and redeemed us from Egypt. Then after the shank bone, we have the hard-boiled egg. The hard-boiled egg represents an egg. Unlike every other food that gets softer the more you cook it, eggs become harder the more you cook it. So therefore, the egg represents inner strength and power. So you have chesed, kindness, and then gvura, strength, like the hard-boiled egg. Then you have tiferet. Tiferet is often referred to as mercy, compassion, and that's the bitter herbs. The bitter herbs represent pain, to feel the pain of another person. After tiferet, we have netzach. Netzach is victory, dominance, and that's the charoset made out of fruits, which fruits of a tree grow tall, represents dominance and victory. Then we have the parsley, the karpas, or the celery, which represents hod, subjugation, humility, like vegetables that grow low to the ground, close to the earth. And then you have yesod, which is bonding, the next attribute, which is the chazeres, the moror made out of romaine lettuce, which go in the sandwich, the idea of bonding with others, like being part of the sandwich combined with others. And the plate represents malchut because it receives all the other 9. Malchut is selflessness, where you receive in order to give to others. So just symbolically, just that you know that all of the 10 items from the plate up to the 6 items on the Seder plate and the 3 matzahs represent the 10 attributes of the soul, just the idea that all 10 components of our being are experiencing freedom on this night of Passover. Now, what else do we have on the Seder plate? Besides the Seder plate, we have the 4 cups of wine. Now, it's interesting that we have 3 matzos, but we have 4 cups of wine. The 3 matzos represents the 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The 4 cups of wine, amongst other things, represents the 4 expressions of redemption, but also represents Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, the 4 matriarchs of the Jewish people. And here we have the masculine component and the feminine component. Matzah and wine, in a sense, are opposites. Why? Because matzah is all about humility. The flat matzah represents humility. That's the whole message of the matzah. It doesn't have time to rise. Matzah and bread are made of the same 2 ingredients, flour and water. The only difference is that with the matzah, it's flat because it didn't rise. The same 2 ingredients in bread is filled metaphorically with hot air, and therefore it's inflated, like an inflated sense of self. So matzah represents humility. Wine, on the other hand, is not suppressing your ego, so to speak. We know when a person drinks, their true identity is revealed, and they become more uninhibited and unrestricted and less confined in their nature and their character. They're more expressive and more wild even when they drink. And here you have the contrast of the matzah and the wine, that to be a Jew does not mean to suppress, God forbid, your character, your personality. God wants us to fully express ourselves. The wine within our soul, the tasty, rich texture that we all have should be expressed. I know a lot of people watch Stissel and they said, why couldn't he be a musician? Why couldn't he be an artist? You should be whatever God made you to be. If you have artistic skills or other talents, you have to utilize them to the fullest. You have to express it like the wine within your soul have to be fully expressed. But before you do that, you have to first have the matzah. You have to have humility. You have to make sure that what you are expressing is coming from a place of humility. That it's not your ego that's being expressed. It's not your haughtiness. It's not your seeking attention or to be in the limelight that you are expressing all of this because you're craving attention or affection or validation, but you're coming from a healthy, humble place. And then you could reveal your truest light, your truest wine, your tastiest wine, and do it in a healthy and in a meaningful way. A lot of people get drunk, but what comes out when they drink? When nichnas yayin, when the wine comes in, the secret dimension of a person is expressed. Some people become mean and angry and hurtful to others when they drink, and others they pour forth with love and depth of soul, of meaning, of goodness and kindness and wisdom. And so we have to make sure that we're humble, and then we can drink the 4 cups, so to speak, and reveal our truest, purest essence of ourselves. Now, we know that we have on the table the matzah, the maror, and the 4 cups of wine, as we just discussed. And the order seems a little bit odd because we have the matzah first, then we have the maror, and then the 4 cups of wine. But the question is, the Jews experienced the bitterness in Egypt before they ate the bread of freedom on the night of their liberation. So why do we say Pesach, Paskalem, Matzah, Umaror? Why do we mention the matzah before the maror if the maror actually came before the matzah? And one of the answers to this question is that in life you don't understand how bitter things were until you taste freedom. And that's why you first have the matzah, which represents the bread of freedom that the Jews ate when they went free on the night of Passover, as a prerequisite to the maror, because you only sometimes realize how bitter things were when you tasted freedom. The tragedy of life is that sometimes we're living a bitter existence. But because we haven't tasted true freedom, we think that this is tasty. It's like the worm in the horseradish thinks it's the sweetest place. It's only when we taste freedom that we look back and we realize how enslaved we were, how confined we were, how bitter things were. And so part of our prayer on the night of Passover is that God should not only free us and liberate us from those things that we recognize are confining us in our lives, that we recognize are bitter, but even more than that, the things in our life that we've made our peace with, things in our life that we've come to tolerate and to accept the status quo, we should be raised up to a greater freedom to the point that we could look back and realize that what we thought was good was actually bitter. What we even thought maybe was sweet was actually bitter, because we have such a new elevated perspective of life now that we realize that so many of the things that were mediocre, that were average, that we sort of accepted as normal and made our peace with were actually very bitter. And that's the sadness, that sometimes we don't even realize how bitter things are. And it takes freedom and a newfound joy in life to realize that the state we were living in prior was very limited and confined, and it was actually meitzarim, a form of confinement and subjugation, because we were not being able to truly be ourselves. And spiritually, this is the whole idea of exile. In exile, we accept exile for the way it is, and we think life is good the way it is. As long as this coronavirus is over, we go back to our normal lives, we'll be happy. But the truth is, God has so much more in store for us, a much better life, a life in which there will be no tears, no evil, no pain in the world. That's the world we should yearn for and work towards redemption, and not accept life as it is and just tolerate it and think that this is actually sweet when there's actually so much pain and sadness in the world, and there's so much room for improvement, as mankind has a long way to go in becoming the type of a world that would be a world of redemption. Another idea is for the Seder night is that we break the matzah before we start telling the Seder story. we have the step of yachatz, where we break the matzah in half. We put away the larger half for the afikoman, which is the dessert at the end of the meal, and we tell the seder, the entire Haggadah, over a broken piece of matzah. And this has a very powerful lesson in of itself. And I mentioned this as well in previous videos, that the Kotzker Rebbe once said, there's nothing blacker than a white lie. There's nothing straighter than a crooked ladder. And there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. Or as Leonard Cohen said, there's a crack in everything, but that's the way the light gets in. And the idea is that on the night of Seder, we have a broken matzah on the table, not a complete matzah. Usually we want everything to be whole, a perfect lulav and esrog, a perfect, unblemished shofar without any cracks in it. The challah on the table has to be whole. And suddenly we want a broken matzah at the table. Yachatz, we break the matzah in half. So why would we break the matzah in half? And it's to symbolize that there's always brokenness in life. But it's only because we have brokenness that we feel the joy of being complete when we put the pieces back together again at the end of the Seder. And that's really the journey of life. We're all born a half a soul. Until we find our soulmate, we're not complete. Why does God give us a state of incompleteness? So we could appreciate the state of completeness when we complete ourselves with our soulmate. The same thing is true in every aspect of life. The Jews were slaves in Egypt. They experienced brokenness, but through that they came to the joy of becoming a nation and carrying with them the lessons of brokenness, the lessons of showing compassion, as the Torah tells us on 36 different occasions and 36 different commandments. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Remember what it felt like to be oppressed and abused and enslaved. And therefore you should be kind to the poor, to the widow, to the orphan, to those in need. In other words, because we tasted brokenness, we could appreciate wholeness and completion. And this is the reason why we tell the story over the incomplete, broken matzah on the night of Pesach rather than a whole, complete matzah. I told the story in one of the previous videos that we did one day, but just to repeat it, that's the story told by a famous story writer, Alan Silverstein. And he tells a story about this wheel. And this wheel was complete, but one day it lost a triangular wedge of its wheel. And suddenly it was missing a piece of its wheel. So it went on a journey around the world to find the missing piece of his wheel. And he was rolling very slowly around the world looking for a piece to fit into his wheel to complete the missing piece. But as he was going so slowly, he started to notice the butterflies and the flowers and the worms, and he would talk to them and play with them. They would jump on his back, and he would pay attention to the sunrises and the sunsets and the flowers and the trees and nature. And he kept on looking for a piece to complete his wheel. But every piece he found was the wrong size. One was too big, one was too small, one was too round, one was too sharp. Till one day he found the perfect piece that fit in, and now the wheel was complete. And once it was complete, he started to roll faster and faster and faster. But suddenly the world didn't look as beautiful. He didn't have time to notice the flowers or the birds or the trees or the butterflies. And so the wheel stopped, and he took out the wedge, he put it on the side, and he continued his journey very slowly around the world, appreciating nature and everything in the world around him. And what a beautiful lesson this Passover, more than any other Passover for all of us. Everyone has been rushing through life. The pace of life has gotten quicker and quicker. Someone once said it used to be you got a letter in the mail. You got a letter in the mail, you had a few days to respond. Then they started with, FedEx, overnight deliveries. Now they expect an answer the next day. Then faxes came along. Now they expect someone faxes you something, they want an answer within a few hours. Then after faxes came emails. Now they want an answer within a few minutes. And then came texting and WhatsApps, and now people expect an answer within a few seconds. And so we're rushing faster and faster to keep up. It used to be you left the office at 5 o'clock. Until you got back the next morning, 9 o'clock, you didn't have to worry about your work. Now people are on their phones, literally working from their homes, from their bedrooms, from their kitchen tables, 24/6. If you keep Shabbat, it's 24/6. There's no rest. 11 o'clock at night, you're responding to emails, to texts. Work is nonstop. Suddenly the coronavirus comes along and a wedge is taken out and everyone's forced to stop. Everyone's forced to go home, to start relaxing, taking it easy, looking around life, paying attention to the small things, appreciating every moment of life. And suddenly we realize through the brokenness that we'll come to a much bigger completeness. After this is over, God willing, soon, we pray for all those who are ill, especially Eli Beer, who's right here in Miami Beach, who needs a big refuah shalem, a man who helps save thousands and thousands of lives, even as he's laying on a ventilator in Miami, thousands of volunteers in Israel saving lives every day. He's such a tzaddik. May God grant him a refuah shalem. We want to celebrate with him. We want to embrace him and hug him and kiss him again like we did so many times at the Palm Beach Synagogue. He was just with us this February at the concert we had for Hatzalah with Shalom Lemmer. May he have a refuah shalema. God willing, very soon this will end and bring an end to the pain and the misery and the suffering and the healing to all those who need refuah shalema. But hopefully something good will come out of this brokenness. And we'll realize that to be more complete, we need to learn to slow down, not rush through life as quickly as we have been doing. One of the highlights of the Seder, of course, is the song of Dayenu. Who doesn't know the song of Dayenu? Who doesn't love the song of Dayenu? Day, Dayenu, Day, Dayenu. And the beauty of the Dayenu song is that we appreciate every single step of the miracle. We don't just say, thank you, God, for redeeming us. We say, God, had you done this, but not done that, Dayenu, would have been enough. Had you taken us out of Egypt, but not killed our firstborn, it would have been enough. Had you taken us out, but not split the sea, it would have been enough. Had you split the sea, but not given us the Torah, it would have been enough. Had you given us the Torah, but not brought us to the land of Israel, it would have been enough. We list every detail of gratitude. And I think this is something that's very appropriate again and challenging for this year. When you're sitting around your Seder, try to think about what are you grateful this year for, despite everything that's going on. Are there things that you can say, Dayenu, God, I'm grateful for my circumstances, that I'm healthy, that my family's healthy, that I have enough food on my table, that thank God I have enough to take care of myself. Thank God my family is safe and healthy. Thank God. What can you find expressions of Dayenu in your life under these circumstances to give gratitude and thanks to Hashem, even as we go through this situation we're in? A very important component of the Seder, of course, is the 4 sons. And of course, everything surrounds the number 4 in the night of Seder. But the 4 sons, and I mentioned as well the other day that each one, and we say echad, one is wise, one is simple, one is wicked, one cannot ask a question. We have to see each child as a one and only child. When we come to the wicked child, the answer to the wicked child is the strangest answer of all. Because what does it say? The wicked child says, what is the service to you? I mean, he excludes himself. And what do we say to the wicked child? We say, Ilu hayusham, had you been there, you would not have been redeemed. Because we know that 80% of the Jews never left Egypt. So we say you would have been part of that 80%. And the question is, why do we speak this way to the child? Yes, it's a wicked child. It's a rebellious child. They're challenging the parents, their beliefs, their traditions. But why such harsh words? As it says in Agadah, blunt out his teeth. And so I want to share with you a much deeper perspective from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But first a little story. They tell a story. It's actually a true story of Chaim Brisk, that before Pesach, someone knocked on his door. A poor woman. And she said, Rabbi, I have a halachic question to ask you before Passover. She said, we're very poor. We can't afford to buy wine for the 4 cups of wine. However, we do have a cow on the farm. And the question is, can we substitute the 4 glasses of wine with 4 glasses of milk? Chaim Brisk thought about it and said, no, I'm sorry. I'm afraid that you cannot, under Jewish law, use milk instead of wine. But let me help you out with some money to buy wine. And he went and he took like 1,000 ruble. And he gave it. He says, here's some money, buy wine for you and your family. When the woman left, the wife of Chaim Brisk, the Rebbitzin, said to the rabbi, I don't understand. The woman needed some wine. It's wonderful. You gave her some money to buy wine, but why 1,000 ruble? Wine is 50 ruble, 100 ruble. Why 1,000 ruble? And Chaim Brisk said, don't you understand what the woman was saying? This woman is coming and asking a question if she could use milk instead of wine. But you know what she's really telling me? She's really telling me that she has no money to make Passover. Because if she wants to use milk instead of wine, obviously she has no meat or chicken, because you can't eat milk and meat together. So she obviously can't afford to have any meat or chicken at her Seder table. So presumably she has no money for wine or for meat or chicken. She has no money for fish either. She has no money for fish. She has no money for matzah either, which is expensive. So therefore, what she's really saying to me through her question is, I have no money to make Passover. Can I have money? She's too embarrassed to ask for money for the whole Passover. So she came with a religious question, can I use milk instead of wine? But I didn't just listen to her question. I listened to what she was really telling me between the lines. And there's such an invaluable lesson in life. Sometimes we listen to people's words. What we really have to do is listen to what they're really saying. Listen to their heart, to their soul, what they're trying to communicate, what lies behind the words. Blunt out the teeth means remove the words that are being spoken by the teeth. Listen to their heart, what they're crying out for. When the rebellious child acts rebellious, what are they really saying? What are they crying out for? What are they calling out for? Are they calling out for love, for affection, for attention? Don't answer their words and their questions. Answer what's really bothering them in their soul. And so when we turn to this rebellious child, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, we say the following. Had you been there, you would not have been redeemed. Yes, not all the Jews went out of Egypt. You know why? Because there was no Jewish nation yet. So those who didn't want to join the Jewish people had an option to stay behind in Egypt. However, now that we are a Jewish people, now that we were taken out of Egypt, now that we went to Mount Sinai, now that we've received the Torah and we became a Jewish nation, now every Jew is a Jew. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And in the ultimate redemption, every Jew will be redeemed, even you, my child. And that's the emphasis. Had you been there, you would not have been redeemed. But in the ultimate redemption, you too will be redeemed. No matter what you do as a Jew, you will always remain a Jew. And that is the loving message we give the child. We embrace the child and we say, you are part of the Jewish people. Even if you reject Judaism and you challenge it, you are still a Jew. We give this child the love of feeling a part of the Jewish people no matter what. You know the story, in the olden days, they used to bribe Jews, pay Jews to convert to Christianity, to Catholicism. And so there was some Jews who were desperate for money in the olden days. They were poor, so they would go and pretend that they were converting in order to get the money. And so this particular priest realized what was happening. And so he said, from now on, if you convert to Catholicism, before you receive the money, you have to live for a few months in the church so we could observe and make sure you're really observing Catholicism. So this Jew came along, he went through the conversion process. They gave him a room to live as they would observe him. It came a Friday night, he set up his Shabbos table to have Shabbat dinner. The priest barges in the middle, he sees him sitting with a Shabbat dinner. He says, what are you doing? You're eating chicken? Don't you know on Friday we don't eat meat on Fridays. We only eat fish. And you're violating the laws of Catholicism. You're not a true convert. And the Jew says, no, I'm not eating any meat. I'm not eating chicken. I'm eating fish. And the priest says, what do you mean you're eating fish? Look at it. It has wings. It has a neck. It has bones. It's a chicken. How could you tell me that you're eating fish? And the Jew says to the priest, well, I came to you a few weeks ago. I told you I'm a Jew. And what did you do? You sprinkled some water on me and you said you're no longer a Jew. You're a Christian. He said, I took the piece of chicken and I sprinkled some water on it. And I said, you're no longer a chicken. You're a fish. And the idea is just like you can't change a chicken to be a fish, you can't change a Jew to be something else that he's not or she's not. And therefore, we say to the wicked child, you too will be redeemed together with the Jewish people. You are part of the Jewish nation. And the night of Passover, we tell the story of the liberation of the Jewish people. We start with the story of Abraham and how God blessed Abraham and told him, your children will be a great nation. And I gave Abraham and Sarah a child, Isaac. And we begin with the story of the birth of Isaac, the first Jewish child. And the name of the first Jewish child was Yitzchak. Yitzchak means joy, means laughter. And the idea, of course, is that the Jewish people all began with one miracle, the birth of one child. And the emphasis is the importance of every Jewish child. There are 4 children at the Seder, but every child is an entire world. Had this child been the only child in the world, it would have been worthwhile for God to create the world. As we know that God created the world for Adam Arishon, for one human being. And so today, when a lot of people find themselves in isolation, they may think, I'm all alone. But we should know that we are never alone, because just like Adam was not alone in this world because God was with him, God is telling us when he created Adam, he didn't create a population of you. He made one human being to teach us that even if a person is alone, they should know that the whole world was created for them. And just like God was with Adam in the Garden of Eden, God is with every one of us at our Seders, even if we're sitting alone. I told you I had a teacher who used to say that all I need is one student. Because God only had one student at Mount Sinai. God taught the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu for 40 days and 40 nights in the heavens. God had one student. It was enough. God just needs one Jew, one person. The 10 Commandments begins with the words, I am the Lord, your God, singular. It doesn't matter where you are, or if you're alone, or if you're with one other person. Your Seder is beautiful and meaningful and significant, and God will join you on your Seder night just to be with you during the celebration of the Seder. It's a story told about the Mizritcha Maggid. He was a young boy of 5 or 6 years old. And there was a fire in his home. And his mother was standing outside crying bitterly. And Mizritcha Maggid saw his mother crying. And he tried to comfort her. And he said, don't worry, Ma, we'll get a new house. God will help us. We'll get a new house. And the mother said, you don't understand, my son. I'm not crying because of the house. The reason I'm crying is because we had an old family tree in the house which traced our ancestry all the way back to King David. And now the family tree was burnt and destroyed, and that's why I'm crying, because we'll never be able to recreate that family tree. And Mizritcha Maggid looked at his mother through her tears and said to her, don't worry, Mommy, I'll start a new family tree. Every one of us comes from a long lineage, but God willing, we will be the ancestors to a great lineage. Just like Isaac, the first Jewish child, became the ancestors of our nation. And we should see ourselves not just as ourselves, but everything we represent, past, present, and future. Everyone's looking for meaning and significance in this Seder, to the times we find ourselves in. And I want to share with you a very beautiful story. It was a story that happened at the Seder table of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. And the story is that there were a group of people sitting at the Seder of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and one of them was a guest who didn't know the traditions of the Chabad customs, which one of the traditions, and you may have heard of this, is called not to eat gebrachs. Gebrachs is foods that are soaked in liquid. Why? Because maybe there's a little pocket of unbaked dough in the matzah, and if it comes in contact with liquid, after 18 minutes, it could become leaven, it could become chametz. And so this Jew didn't know, so he took his matzah during the meal and he dipped it into the red beet salad, and he started to eat it. And when people saw him doing this at that Seder table of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, people started to jump at him and in anger say, "What are you doing? It's we don't do that at the table. It's gebrachs." And the Jew turned red. He was embarrassed. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe turned to the Hasidim who was sitting around the table, and he said to them in Yiddish, "Beser aroita matzah v'aroita panim." It's better there should be a red matzah than there should be a red face. Yes, it's very important to keep the laws of Passover with all the customs and not to dip the matzah in liquid, but it's better matzah should be red from the beet salad than the face of a Jew should be red. And, wherever you walk today, you see people with masks covering their face. And when you see someone's face behind the mask, you want to see their face. And suddenly you appreciate seeing someone's face. But we should recognize the importance of a face. and important that we should never shame another face. But on the contrary, our job and our responsibility in life is to bring smiles to people's faces. Now when someone smiles, you can't see them smile. It's behind the mask. God willing, when this is over, we should remember the lesson that we should be able to bring joy to people, bring smiles to other people. And that's really the whole message of Passover. The message of Passover is God put us through this experience. We thank God he took us out of Egypt. Well, why did he have to put us in Egypt in the first place? Thank you very much for redeeming us. But why did you allow the Egyptians to oppress us in the first place? We don't seem to talk about that on the night of Passover. And the answer, we know why God put us through slavery. Because he wanted us to be the most empathetic, sensitive, caring people on earth. Why have Jews been in the forefront of every movement, of every breakthrough, of every development, of every cure? I mentioned today in my video that the founder of the BDS movement said that if Israel finds the vaccine or the cure to coronavirus, it's okay, even if you're a member of BDS, to go ahead and use it. Because even our enemies realize that great things happen from the Jewish people, and he anticipates that's going to happen from the Jewish people. So hypocritically, he's saying we have to boycott Israel, but not if it means to save our lives. Then we could turn to Israel and the Jewish people. The Jewish people are known for all of their Nobel Prizes that they've won. What has driven us to do this? To bring smiles to people's faces, to remove tears and pain and suffering. Why are we such a nation? It all traces back to the story of the Exodus from Egypt. Because we've walked through the valley of the shadow of death more than any other nation, we are the most sympathetic, the most empathetic, the most compassionate, the most understanding of the plight of others, because we've been on the other side of this so often. And that is the reason we remember every year the story of the Exodus from Egypt, because we want to never forget the lessons we learned. We want to remember our humble origins. We want to remember our suffering. We want to remember the feeling of suffering. We want to eat the bitter herbs and the food dipped in the salt water, the tears of our ancestors, so our hearts never become cold or callous or closed off to the plight of others. We always remain compassionate and caring about others, empathetic. That is the most important message of the Passover Seder, to become better people, more loving and caring individuals, because we went through it. And that's why 36 times in the Torah gives us different commandments. It says, do this or don't do that, because you were slaves in the land of Egypt, you were strangers, you know what it feels like to be the outsider, to be the underdog, to be the vulnerable, to be the weak and the downtrodden, to be the oppressed, to be the taken advantage of, and therefore you should be the first one to champion the plight and cause of others who are in need. And so remember, when we finish all of this with the masks, to remember when we remove our masks, we should want to see people smile and bring joy to people. Never say things that could be hurtful or harmful to others, to shame others, because more important than, as a previous Lubavitcher Rabbi said, more important than having the matzah not being read is that the face of another Jew should not be read. A face of another Jew should be filled with joy. I just want to conclude with the last step of the Seder. We all know the last step of the Seder is Nirtzah. What is Nirtzah? L'shana ba b'Yerushalayim. We say, God, we hope that Nirtzah, that our service was desirable, was acceptable, was pleasing before you, and grant us blessings, and next year we should be in Jerusalem. And what's unique about the last step, the 15th step of the Seder, different than all the other previous 14 steps? Every one of the first 14 steps are action-based. We have to do something. Kadesh, we have to make Kiddush. Urchatz, we have to wash our hands. Karpas, we have to dip the parsley in the salt water. Tonight from 6 to 7, we'll go through the 15 steps. The last one, we don't have to do anything. It's just a prayer that our Seder should be acceptable and desirable before God. Why is this one different than our first 14 steps, which are action-oriented? And this one is just a prayer. Let it be acceptable. And perhaps the answer is that after we've done everything, the last step of freedom is to say, I've done a good job. It's acceptable to me, not just to God. Sometimes our ego doesn't allow us to ever be content and satisfied. We always say it's not enough. Maybe I need to do more, not just in the physical, material sense, but even in the spiritual sense. To be able to say, you know what, I worked hard, I prepared for this Passover, I did the best I could under the circumstances, especially this year. I conducted a meaningful, beautiful Seder to the best of my ability, and now God, accept my service. But more importantly, I accept what I've done. I'm content, I'm happy, I'm satisfied. I am pleased with what I've done. That is the last and the final step of the Seder, because that's the last step of freedom. Sometimes we work and we toil and we put in so much efforts, but we we blame ourselves, we criticize our inner voice, our inner critic says, I'm not a good enough mother, I'm not a good enough father, I'm not a good enough husband, I'm not a good enough wife, I'm not a good enough child, and we plague ourselves with guilt. I'm not a good enough friend, I'm not a good enough person. Nirtza, the final step of freedom of the Passover Seder is, if I've done the best I can, I've given it my all, I've put in all my effort, now it is pleasing to God, knowing that God is happy with you because you've done the best you can, and that's all God asks you to do. You do the best, and God will do the rest. If we've done our best in preparing for the Seder, yes, the Seder will have limitations. It will have certain restrictions that we will not ever have again, hopefully, and never have had before. We'll be limited in one way or another. We're not going to be with the people we want to be with, perhaps. We're not going to be able to conduct it the way we usually do conduct it. But if we give it our best shot and we do the best we can leading up to Passover and leading the most meaningful Seder, then we can be satisfied and content and know that we've done it the way God wanted us to do it, to the best of our ability under this year's circumstances. And Nirtza, God will grant us the blessing of L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. And inside, we should feel happy and satisfied that we conducted the Seder for the 3,332nd time in Jewish history, just like our ancestors did. And Jews have always conducted Seders each and every year, even under difficult circumstances. This year is a difficult circumstance again, but like our ancestors, we will prevail and have the most meaningful Seder this year as well. And wishing everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And we look forward to you joining us together with Rabbi Rice tonight at 6 o'clock as we actually go through the 15 steps to the Seder, so you could do it yourself at home tomorrow night and Thursday night on the nights of Passover. Chag Sameach, everyone, and wishing everyone a wonderful day. Okay. One second. Any questions before we go?
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Ken, you gonna get your Seder plate?
Yes.
Okay, anyone have any questions before we go? Okay, wish everyone a good day and a happy Pesach.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hope to see you this evening.